In the past decade, an extraordinary claim proposing the presence of a parallel universe has been captivating cosmologists and scientists around the world. As it turns out, the expanding universe we see around us may not be the only one or the only version. The multiverse theory may be difficult to believe for the skeptics and realists, but many leading scientists have also spoken in favor of the super Copernican revolution. Most people consider the concept of the parallel universe a supernatural myth and believe that a deep investigation into most alternate universe experiences and strange phenomena like déjà vu can be rationally explained. But the recent pandemic sent the world into a downward spiral of existential crisis and doubt. Too many people resorted to searching the internet for something meaningful, and in this quest, we've discovered the spookiest and strangest corner of the web where people's understanding of the parallel universe and multiverse theory is prompting many to share their unbelievable stories that can only be explained by the presence of a parallel universe. Many people think humanity is continuously receiving signals from the other version of our universe, and others have seemingly been hopping realities. Now, it may seem like an ultra-advanced and modern concept, but in actuality, it can be traced as far back as ancient Greece. But the idea garnered attention back in 1957 when Hugh Everett established the first ever multiverse theory. He proposed that our universe coexists parallel to an infinite number of universes. This made the masses curious as to whether it was possible to cross into various universes at different points in time and space through an intricate web of interdimensional doorways. This is, however, just a theory, and the existence of a multiverse still needs to be proven by physicists and cosmologists. There are some mind-boggling stories and even legends that are so difficult to explain that the rational mind cannot help but wonder if there are certain glitches in the fine system of the universe. Today, we're going to share with you guys some accounts of people who believe that they've received signals from the parallel universe or have transitioned in and out of it. Scientists are finding it hard to explain what happened in these situations. See for yourself and decide whether it's just the rogue imagination of people or if portals to a parallel universe were in fact opened and traveled through. Number 1. The Man from Taurid. This story of nerve-wracking incidents originated in Japan. The events reportedly took place sometime in the mid to late 1950s, but there are disputed accounts. A man whose name on record is John Allen Kuchar-Zagros presented his passport at the Tokyo airport like any other passenger, expecting to be allowed through the gate. All his paperwork was tidy and in order, but something peculiar caught the eye of the airport staff. The country that had issued the passport did not exist. His passport was seemingly issued by a country called Taured. The customs officers at the airport were allegedly informed about this strange passport from a non-existent country, and they detained the man for questioning. They asked him to point Taured out on a map, and to their amazement, he did pinpoint it. However, it was labeled on the map as Andorra instead. The man insisted that the country not present on the map was around 1,000 years old. In order to prove that he was in fact telling the truth, the man even showed the officers several official passport stamps and currencies from multiple countries that he had previously visited for business reasons. The officers were still not entirely convinced and did a little more digging, according to most retellings of this tale. In their quest for truth, they contacted the company he worked for and found out that it was a real company, but not in Taured. They also called the hotel in which the man kept insisting that he had a reservation, and it was also real, but there wasn't any reservation under the man's name. The officers couldn't pursue this further, as everything was seemingly legitimate, well, except for the bizarre fact that neither Taured nor the man officially existed anywhere in the world. The investigation kept going, and meanwhile the man was allowed to stay at a nearby hotel, but an armed guard remained outside his door all day long, as they suspected he was just a clever criminal. But just after one night's stay, the man was gone the next morning. It was as if he vanished into thin air, but he also took all his documents with him. He left no trace and was supposedly never seen again. It seemed like he wasn't even there in the first place. Nobody really knows what happened in this baffling case. Many think it's all a well-planned hoax. There are no official records of this mysterious man. His story also closely resembles a different case of an actual con artist from Japan around the same time. But that hasn't stopped the optimists from considering the possibility that he may have been a visitor from a parallel universe who accidentally landed in ours. Number 2. Highway in Seville. A man named Pedro Oliver Ramirez allegedly took one wrong turn that changed his entire life. Well, his dimension definitely did. This happened in Spain on November 9th, 1986. This is one of the most popular and widespread claims of interdimensional travel out there. Ramirez was driving along a typical route. He was on his way home to Alcalá de Guadaira from work in the city we know as Seville. He then realized he was passing through a very odd part of the road that he had never previously seen or paid attention to. An eerie 6-lane highway appeared before him, but he did not recognize it at all. On the side of this road, he spotted a tall building he had never seen before, despite the fact that he had been traveling on this route on a daily basis for a while now. During the first part of this route, everything had seemed normal, but as soon as he passed a curve, the surroundings entirely changed. He observed a plane about 100 meters away, and there were 5 or 6 industrial buildings there. Each one was around 8 meters tall and was fully illuminated. On the other side were residential buildings with about 20 plants each, and at the edge of the road was dense grass. After realizing the absolute change in his surroundings, he felt a sensation of heat invading his vehicle and started hearing a choir or distant voices. According to the tale, these voices told him that he had been transferred to a different hemisphere. He didn't know what to do and just kept driving until he came across an intersection having signs pointing in 3 different directions. He took one of the roads assuming he was headed back towards Seville, but out of nowhere, his car came to a sudden halt. He looked out the window and saw that he was in front of his home. He was annoyed by what happened and decided to retrace his steps. While investigating, he realized that the usual route between his house and Seville took about half an hour, but that night it took him 3 hours and 5 minutes to get back home. His car had consumed fuel equivalent to 200 kilometers. Ramirez never managed to find his way back to the 6-lane highway, probably because it's an entirely different dimension, and the portal to that dimension is probably closed forever. Number 3. Carol Chase McElhenney. Another peculiar account of interdimensional shift was narrated by a woman named Carol Chase McElhenney. Back in March 2006, she was driving from her home in San Bernardino to the sheepdog trials in Perris, California with her dog. Topping a hill, she noticed an exit sign to nearby Riverside. Her family had historic roots in the city dating back to the 1800s. Her grandparents were buried in the town's local cemetery. Her aunt and grandmother had homes there, and Carol herself had been a resident for a while after college. She thought it would be fun to visit old, familiar places on her way. As soon as she had this thought, she suddenly smelled a whiff of cigar smoke in her car, especially after the smell reminded her of her grandfather who had passed away when she was a child. She planned to go to the cemetery. Carol drove to Paris, checked into a motel, and after the first sheepdog trial ended, nostalgia took over and dragged her back to Riverside. She stopped at the first cemetery, realizing something was out of place. She was unable to find her childhood home or the homes of her relatives. She didn't recognize any of the houses, but the numbers were still correct. The cemetery where her grandparents were buried was gone, and in its place was a fenced lot full of overgrown weed. She drove around trying to find anything familiar but had no luck. She did recognize the Riverside City College and Central Middle School, but when she reached the University Avenue, she saw some frightening-looking people and got out of there as fast as she could. Afterwards, she looked for Mission Inn and couldn't find it either. Carol thought she had landed in a different dimension in which the happy town of Riverside she grew up in was a shady little place. She drove to the street where her grandmother and aunt's house was, but both were gone. In place of her grandmother's large Tudor home with a towering eucalyptus in front, there were newer ranch-style homes with bushes in the neighborhood. Even the house Carol lived in was gone. The place looked run down with scary people and a whole lot of graffiti. Everything she knew was gone: the banks, restaurants, insurance companies, everything. She was afraid to stop and ask for directions, so after a couple of hours of roaming in Riverside, she went back to Paris, where things were totally normal. A few years later, when Carol's father died, she returned to Riverside for his funeral and found the town reverted back to normal, just like she knew it from childhood. Everything was back: her grandmother's home, her aunt's home, the Mission Inn, and the cemetery, and she never encountered the alternate version of her beloved town again. Number 4. Jofar Vorin of Laxaria. Back in 1851, a man was found roaming in a dazed state in Frankfurt an der Oder, a small German village. Reports suggested that he was just wandering around looking confused. When the local authorities questioned him, he managed to tell them in broken German that his name was Jofar or maybe Joseph Voren, and he was completely unaware of his whereabouts. He had no idea where he was at the time. He also claimed that he came to Germany looking for his brother, but somehow got caught up in a shipwreck in an unknown location. He kept insisting that the languages he was speaking were Laxarian and Abramian. He claimed to be a citizen of Laxaria, a place no one had heard of before as it didn't exist. Voren allegedly explained to the authorities that Laxaria was located in a continent-like region of Ermt named Sakria, but no one besides Voren knew of this place. He was also unable to retrace his trip to that point on a map. He explained that his religion was Christian in form and doctrine, but was called Ispatian. The Laxaria he spoke of was supposedly hundreds of miles from Europe, and there was a vast ocean separating the country from it. He didn't recognize the name of continents as we know them. He revealed more about his version of Earth and said that the Earth he knew was divided into 5 main regions named Sakria, Aflar, Aslar, Auslar, and Uplar. He fluently spoke 2 languages unknown to us. It is believed that he was transferred to Berlin for further investigation. However, some retellings claim that he threw himself out of the carriage in what looked like a hysterical fit and escaped on his way there. He was never seen again, just like the man from Taured. There is no official record of how he looked or where he went. So was this all some kind of elaborate prank, or was there a glitch in the Matrix that brought Voren to our version of the universe? No one can say for sure. Number 5. 4 friends and a new dimension. This misadventure began when 4 friends were returning from Utah Rodeo in May of 1972. The group was driving down Utah Highway 56 on a dark, moonless night and eventually reached the Modena Railroad crossing landmark. 2 of the girls were reportedly sisters, the 3rd girl was their first cousin, and the 4th one was a friend of one of the sisters. They were driving in a 1971 Chevrolet Nova, owned by the father of the sisters. They had taken the car to attend a very popular annual rodeo happening near Pioche, Nevada, about 180 miles northeast of Vegas. They came across a fork in the road and took left and passed through Gadianton Canyon. To their utmost surprise, the road changed to white cement after a while. They thought that they had taken the wrong turn, so they turned around. On their way back to the fork, they realized the scenery around them was entirely different. The desert had been replaced with lush green trees and fields. Then one of the girls suddenly screamed as she spotted a group of egg-shaped vehicles having 3 wheels and piercing lights started chasing them. They escaped the strange vehicle and returned to the desert. They had 3 flat tires and were compelled to stop. A state trooper picked them up the next day. He was having a hard time believing their story, but he found that the tire tracks of the girl's car had just stopped all of a sudden at one point. He couldn't see them going further. Was this where the doorway to a parallel universe swallowed their car? No one can say. Number 6. The Mandela Effect. One of the spookiest signals from the multiverse has to be the Mandela Effect. It is an observed phenomenon in which a huge chunk of the population remembers an entirely different version of a significant event or even shares a memory of an event that never occurred. This term was first introduced by Fiona Broom, a paranormal researcher who realized that a good number of people at a conference she was attending in 2010 shared her memory of Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. But the former South African president was alive and released from prison in 1990. He was also alive and well at the time of the conference. Quantum theory enthusiasts think the Mandela Effect is strong evidence supporting the presence of the multiverse. Mandela didn't pass away until 2013, but an immense number of people remember being taught in school that he died in prison. The believers of parallel universes and alternate dimensions think that in a parallel dimension Nelson Mandela did pass away in prison in the 80s, and in another dimension he was alive until 2013. The 2 dimensions somehow overlapped or merged in some way, and that's probably why some people remember one reality while others remember the second one. There are many other examples of the Mandela Effect too. In fact, TikTok has its very own corner full of stories shared by people that are manifestations of this effect. Another popular example is from the infamous cult psychological thriller Silence of the Lambs, based on Thomas Harris's novel. The phrase "Hello, Clarice" is
Dr. Lecter, my name is Clarice Starling. May I speak with you?
Become a signature for anyone trying to imitate the vicious Hannibal Lecter, because in their memory or in their version of reality, that's what he said. However, if you see the movie, you will realize that Lecter never said that. In fact, when he meets Clarice for the first time, he says, "Good morning."
Good morning.
But people remember him saying her name in a melodic tone. And who here doesn't remember the evil queen from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs saying, "Mirror, mirror on the wall"?
Mirror on the wall.
Well, that was never said. In fact, in the movie, the Wicked Queen says, "Magic mirror on the wall." There are hundreds of examples of the Mandela effect out there. You might find some even in your own life if you carefully think about it. Number 7. The Rose Woman. This bizarre incident was shared by a Redditor who was left astonished by a woman while he waited to catch a SkyTrain in an undisclosed city. He was around 15 minutes from his destination waiting at the station for the train. That's when he noticed a woman with glazed eyes requesting people to help her out with some money. She came up to the man and asked him if he could spare some money. She needed it for buying flowers for her brother who was in the hospital. The man thought it was just a ruse. Despite that, he gave her $5. According to him, he was convinced that she was lying about the roses for her brother. So then his train pulled up and he got on. From the glass, he saw her walking to others, asking them for money, probably reciting the same story. He arrived at his destination about 15 minutes later, and the man walked down to a bus stop. There was just one bus going where he was headed, so he hopped on and waited for the driver to finish reading his paper before the doors closed and they were on their way. However, 10 to 15 minutes later, the driver pulled up again for a routine stop, and the man was left shocked by what he saw next. The same woman who asked him for money at the train station got onto the bus holding a dozen roses in her hand. She looked at the man and walked straight on to take a seat. The man, however, was incredibly confused by this. He couldn't decipher how she got to a bus stop far from the station he got off at, and that too before him. She didn't only beat him there, but somehow also had the time to go to a store and buy the roses. How did she get there so fast? Was it a different version of her that got on the bus, or was it some kind of social experiment? Maybe she was a doppelganger. There have been other unfathomable accounts like that. A man during a trip to California with his wife recalled on the internet that they both saw a man who looked exactly like him. He had the exact same face. It was like looking into a mirror. Maybe his counterpart from a different dimension had wandered into this one. There's no way to tell. Number 8. Green Children of Woolpit. This one happened a while back in the 13th century to be exact. The small village of Woolpit, England was where these events unraveled. Two strange-looking children appeared in the village out of nowhere, and they looked very different. They were siblings, but they had greenish-colored skin. And that's not all. They even spoke an entirely unique language no one had ever heard of. Their clothing was also pretty weird. The locals took the two children in and looked after them, but unfortunately the little boy became sick and was unable to recover. He eventually passed away. The girl, however, blended in with the people and started living a normal life. She started eating normal food like the locals, and soon enough, her skin started losing the greenish hue. She also learned to speak English and told the people that she and her brother came from a place where everyone had green skin and the sun didn't shine bright there. According to her, they were herding their father's cattle when they heard a thundering noise suddenly, and to their disbelief, they ended up in a new place they didn't recognize. She grew up in the village, got married, and started her new life in our universe, but her story suggests that the two siblings had ended up in our world from a different dimension where humans had green skin. There's no other explanation for this bizarre tale after all. How else do you justify two children with green skin speaking a language foreign to our planet? Number 9. Two Mums. This story was also shared by a Redditor, and to say it caused a stir would be an understatement. Back in 2012, this woman was staying with her mother for the last few months of her pregnancy. Her mother would leave for work at around 7 in the morning and wake her up while she got ready. On the day it happened, they woke up and went about their routine. She saw her mother off, locked the door, and went to her mother's room to watch a TV show she usually watched every day after her mother left for work. But around 30 minutes later, she had to use the restroom, and while she was in there, she was scared out of her wits by her mum opening the door on her. The mother stared at her for a bit and then closed the door. She quickly got up, washed her hands within a few seconds, and went out to see her mother. However, she was nowhere to be seen. In the shortest interval of time, she appeared and disappeared. When the woman checked the main door, it was still locked and her mother's car wasn't in the driveway. She called her mother to see where she was and was baffled to hear her say that she had just pulled into work. The woman said that whenever she asks her mother about this incident, she doesn't say anything. In fact, she doesn't even remember what happened that day. That's quite an unsettling incident that would scare even the bravest of us. How was her mother on her way to work and at the bathroom door at the same time? It's physically impossible unless we accept that it was a glitch in the Matrix where two alternate realities had a sort of mix-up. Number 10. The wrong husband. Multiverse enthusiasts think that it's possible for people in different places to phase between different parallel realities, and this story describes something exactly like that. A Reddit user named Aunt Masso told Reddit that she was newly wed. She and her husband had been married for barely 1.5 months when one day she woke up at around 5:30 a.m. Her husband was sound asleep beside her. She recalls seeing a notification on her phone. It was a text from Sam, her husband. She had sent a love heart to Sam around midnight, to which he had replied asking who it was. Only Sam was deep in sleep right next to her at midnight. Aunt Masso says she's a light sleeper and would have definitely woken up if he had gotten out of bed or turned his phone on. She thought her husband was just playing a cheeky joke, so she wrote back, "Who is this?" And just a few seconds later, she got a reply from her husband saying, "I asked you first." This spooked her out. After all, Sam was pressed against her right side, sound asleep. She looked at his nightstand to confirm that his phone was still there, and it was dark and silent. She again asked, "Seriously, who is this? Why are you coming up in my phone under one of my contact names?" The person on the other side asked what name they were under, to which she replied that maybe this was some sort of a crossed wires situation. The person on the other side then asked her whether she was in a particular town. To her surprise, it was the town that they lived in. They both established that both of them were in the same town. So the person further asked where she lived, as it might be a glitch in the system due to being in the vicinity. She, however, didn't want to give up her street address. She asked him if her number came up on his phone under someone else's name too. To this he answered that he found her among his contacts and didn't remember creating it. It was saved as Wi-Fi with a heart next to it. He was just curious to see who it was. He also told her that he lived on Violet Street. She was stunned to hear this, as her husband had saved her number as Wi-Fi but pronounced it as Wifey, and no one beside them knew about this cute personal thing. Moreover, she lived on Violet Street too. She said that the writing style of the person on the other side was quite familiar. She confirmed again that her husband's phone was on the nightstand and he was still asleep. She thought that someone was pranking her, so she turned her phone off and fell asleep. The next morning, she discussed the episode with her husband, who had no recollection of the event, and there weren't any text messages on his phone. He texted her hi to check whether the Sam from last night was in fact her husband's number, and to their surprise, the message popped up just below the last text from her conversation with Sam. Many think this was an interdimensional communication, and the Sam she was talking to was from an alternative reality. Could this really happen though? Could the transmission waves from different dimensions get entangled? What do you think happened here? Tell us in the comments below.